Two households, both alike in dignity, in fair Verona, where will they are seen.
From ancient grudge, break to new mutiny, where civil blood makes civil hands unclean.
From forth the fatal loins of these two foes, a pair of star-crossed lovers take their life,
whose misadventured, piteous overthrows do with their death bury their parents' strife.
The fearful passage of their death-marked love and the continuance of their parents' reign,
which but their children's end naught could remove,
is now the 2 hours traffic of our stage.
The which if you with patient ears attend, what here shall miss, our toil shall strive to mend.
Welcome back to the Shakespeare Showdown show. This episode is episode number 9, the final episode and the championship round of the Romeo and Juliet Showdown. We started with 10 contestants and we are now down to our final 2, only one of which will emerge victorious today and be crowned the Shakespeare Showdown show Romeo and Juliet champion. Before we get to our main event today, we have a lot of other work that we need to do, which will not only serve to warm us up for the final match, but also provide some important context to what we will be studying in the final showdown. So the program for this episode's proceedings will be as follows. The first thing that we'll do is we will have a review of the 8 contestants that failed to qualify for the championship from the previous 8 episodes. To do this, we'll show one bonus clip from each contestant to highlight one extra positive thing that they each give us, something that we didn't get the chance to witness in previous episodes. This exercise will include one part from Act 5, Scene 1, which will officially get us started in our analysis of the 5th act of the play, the final act. Second, we will do a brief edition of Bad Idea Time regarding one possible idea for Act 5, Scene 2, which, if nothing else, will serve as a brief summary of that scene. Third, we will do an analysis of the first part of Act 5, Scene 3. This part of the play includes the third official death of the play, which is the death of Paris. And for our study of this part of the play, we will be featuring a special guest clip from a source that we haven't yet seen in this tournament, and that will be a surprise. Fourth, we will do formal introductions of our 2 championship contestants. And finally, fifth, we will have our main event, which will be the Romeo and Juliet championship match. The subject of our championship match will be the second part of Act 5, Scene 3, which includes the final speeches of Romeo and Juliet as well as their deaths. That will be the topic of the championship match. So, let's get started. To review our 8 runner-ups, what we're going to do is we're going to make a top 10 list. This list right here is a list of our contestants in chronological order, with the oldest at the top. We're going to replace this list with a top 10 list, starting with number 10 at the bottom, and then count down or count up from 10 to 3, going in the order in which each contestant was eliminated. For each contestant, we will quickly review why they were eliminated, but we'll also share one bonus clip that showcases one extra cool or interesting or positive thing about them, something that we never got the chance to show or to mention before. So, starting with number 10. Coming in at number 10 on our top 10 list, we have the 1954 Renato Castellani movie, which was our first elimination in episode 1. We eliminated this contestant because it took too many creative liberties with the text, including killing the character Abraham, which we said was a little bit too much to swallow. Now, one cool thing about this movie that we missed is the marriage ceremony of Romeo and Juliet, which we talked about in episode 5, and we showed a couple versions of that from other contestants, but we didn't get to witness it from this version. And this version actually does it in a way that is fascinating and somewhat bizarre, and it's something that I don't fully understand. What they do is when Romeo and Juliet get married, they put Romeo and Juliet on opposite sides of a wall with like a small window with metal bars between them. Let's go ahead and watch this and you'll see what I mean. This is the marriage of Romeo and Juliet, which once again is technically supposed to happen off stage between Act 2 and Act 3, but they usually show it in movies, and this is how they show it from the 1954 movie. Let's watch this.
Ego coniungo vos in matrimonium, in nomine Patris, et Filii, et Spiritus Sancti. Amen.
So I'm not sure what is happening exactly, but I am sure everyone will agree that whatever it is interesting. And that is from the 1954 movie. Coming in at number 9, we have the 2013 Broadway play, which was our second elimination from episode 2. We eliminated this version because of Orlando Bloom's on-stage motorcycle, which we decided was a little bit too ridiculous for us. Also, there were some complications, shall we say, involving Romeo and Lady Capulet's ages. Anyway, one highlight from this version, which we never got the chance to see, was Mr. Chuck Cooper in the role of Juliet's father, Lord Capulet. Now, the best scene for Lord Capulet is Act 3, Scene 5, when Lord Capulet goes on his long rampage against Juliet, which we watched a little bit of from a couple other contestants in episode 7. But now we're going to watch the Chuck Cooper version of that tirade from the 2013 Broadway performance, simply because we can't allow this showdown to end without getting him in here at least once. So, this is Chuck Cooper as Lord Capulet in Act 3, Scene 5. Let's watch.
We scarce thought us blessed that God had lent us but this only child, but now I see this one is one too much, and that we have a curse in having her.
The God in heaven bless her! You are to blame, my lord, to rate her so.
And why? My lady Wisdom, hold your tongue. Good prudence, matter with your gossips, go.
I speak no treason.
Oh, God, you go done.
May not one speak!
Peace! You mumbling fool! Utter your gravity or a gossip's bowl, for here we need it not.
You are too hot.
God's bread, it makes me mad. Day, night, hour, time, tide, work, play, alone, in company, still my care hath been to have her matched. And having now provided a gentleman of noble parentage, fair domains, youthful and nobly lined, stuffed, as they say, with honorable parts, proportioned as one's thought would wish a man. And then, to have a wretched, puling fool, a whining mammet in her fortune's tender to answer, I'll not wed, I cannot love, I am too young, I pray you pardon me. But an you'll not wed, I'll pardon you. Graze where you will, you shall not house with me. Look to it, think on't, I do not use to jest. Thursday is near, lay hand on heart, advise. And you be mine, I'll give you to my friend. And you be not, hang, beg, starve, die in the streets, or by my soul I'll ne'er acknowledge thee.
All right. Coming in at number 8, we have the 1976 Thames TV version of the play, which was our third elimination from episode 3. We eliminated this contestant because of some frustrations, shall we say, involving them taking certain initiatives that were highly admirable and enjoyable, to be sure, in the Act 2, Scene 2 orchard scene, while neglecting to take other more necessary initiatives in the same scene. The unique thing about this version is it does represent the longest version of the play in our showdown, clocking in at 3 hours and 6 minutes. This version of the play is a nice full-length option that includes every scene, including the often skipped or forgotten parts of the play, such as, for example, the servants talking amongst themselves at the beginning of Act 1, Scene 5 at the Capulet house. The servants in this scene talk about such vital matters as the marchpane dessert or the marzipan dessert. They also discuss a mysterious couple of people named Susan Grindstone and Nell. And we mustn't forget about Susan Grindstone and Nell. So, as an example of an often overlooked or skipped part of the play, let's go ahead and watch this part from the 1976 Thames TV movie. These are the Capulet servants at the beginning of Act 1, Scene 5 at the Capulet house before the Capulet feast. This is Samson here with the curly hair. You may remember him for taking a kick to the groin in episode 1. Anyway, let's watch this.
Where's Potpan that he helps not to take away?
He shifted trencher. He scrape a trencher.
When good manners shall lie all in one or two men's hands, and they unwashed too. Oh, 'tis a foul thing.
Away with the joint stools, remove the cork cupboard, look to the plate. Good thou. Save me a piece of marchpane, and as thou loves me, let the porter let in Susan Grindstone and Nell.
Oh. Anthony and Potpan.
Aye, boy. Ready?
You are looked for and called for, asked for and sought for in the great chamber.
Cannot be here and there too. Surely, boys, be brisk a while, and the longer liver take all.
And that's when Romeo and his lusty gentleman arrive. But don't forget about Susan Grindstone and Nell. Coming in at number 7, we have the 2018 Royal Shakespeare Company play performed at the Royal Shakespeare Theatre. This was our 4th elimination, eliminated in episode 4. We eliminated this contestant due to some incompatibilities between their handling of the ever-important Act 2 orchard scene and the sage virtues extolled by Friar Lawrence. What we said was that this version took some dangerous risks with the cube that we talked about, and those risks ended up not paying off, resulting in a somewhat disappointing finish outside the top 5 for the RSC. But being the Royal Shakespeare Company, they certainly did bring a lot of positive things to the table, things that we weren't able to highlight. So we'd like to show one very brief thing that we enjoyed a lot. If you remember, in episode 6, we studied Act 3, Scene 1, which is the scene where Mercutio fights Tybalt and Mercutio is killed. That scene begins with Benvolio and Mercutio together before Tybalt arrives, and Benvolio says to Mercutio, "I pray thee, good Mercutio, let's retire." And we made note of Benvolio acting as a peacemaker. Well, in this performance, the 2018, they put a really funny twist on that interaction. It's really small, but it's a very funny and surprising twist. During the extended conversation between Benvolio and Mercutio, which we didn't go deeply into, Mercutio lists a bunch of examples about how it's actually Benvolio and not himself who is the one who is quick to quarrel. Mercutio claims that Benvolio once quarreled with someone because they had one hair more or one hair less in their beard than Benvolio. He claims that Benvolio once quarreled with someone because the man was cracking nuts and Benvolio has hazel eyes. And he says that Benvolio once quarreled with a man because the man coughed and woke up Benvolio's dog that was sleeping in the sun. Now, this is going to be a very short clip that we're going to show from the 2008 version. But to fully appreciate it, we need to hear how it sounds in a more traditional way. So first, we'll show a traditional recital of these lines, including the line about the dog, from the 1976 Thames TV version. And then we'll watch the spin that the RSC puts on it. So this is how it sounds in the Thames TV version. This will be Robin Nedwell as Mercutio speaking. Let's listen to this.
Thou didst quarrel with a man for coughing in the street because it hath woken thy dog that hath lain asleep in the sun. And didst thou not fall out with a tailor for wearing his new doublet before Easter, and with another for tying his new shoes with old riband, and yet thou would do to me from quarrelling?
So that's a pretty traditional way. Let's hear how the RSC play does it. This will be Charlotte Josephine playing Mercutio. Remember, this version does a lot of gender switches, and Mercutio here will be on top of the infamous cube. Let's listen to this.
Thou hast quarrelled with a man for coughing in the street.
Because he woke me dog that was lying asleep in the sun.
And yet thou wilt shoot to me from quarrelling.
So that's hilarious. It's legitimately funny on its own, but it's especially funny for people who are familiar enough with the play to know that's not supposed to be Benvolio's line there. And the ironic twist is that it proves Mercutio's point that Benvolio is the one with the short temper. Instead of just seeing Benvolio giggle knowingly, we see his short temper made manifest. It's just a simple cut and paste job, extremely small, only one line, in a speech that almost always gets shortened, but the payoff is awesome. This is where the Royal Shakespeare Company can truly shine, down in the atomic details of the literature. Moving on, coming in at number 6, we have the 1978 BBC TV movie. This was our 5th elimination, eliminated in episode 5. We eliminated this contestant because of the awkward and inappropriate and creepy age difference between the two main actors. Romeo being 25 years old and Juliet being significantly younger. I always mention Michael Hordem as Lord Capulet and Alan Rickman as Tybalt as my go-to examples of highlights from this version. We saw both of them separately in previous episodes, Michael Hordem in episode 5 and Alan Rickman in episode 6. Lord Capulet and Tybalt do have one scene together, which is Act 1, Scene 5, at the Capulet Feast, when Lord Capulet calls Tybalt a quote-unquote saucy boy. Let's go ahead and watch that part from the BBC version, and we'll divide this segment into 3 sub-segments. The first part will be Lord Capulet and Tybalt arguing back and forth, which looks like this. And this is what it sounds like.
Which, if you respect, show a fair presence and put off these frowns. An ill-beseeming semblance for a feast.
Fits with such a villain as a guest, I'll not endure it.
He shall be endured. What good man, boy. I say he shall. Go to him, either master here or you. Go to. You'll not endure him. God shall mend my soul. You'll make a mutiny among my guests. You will set cock-a-hoop. You'll be the man.
My uncle, 'tis a shame.
Go to. You are a saucy boy.
In the very next sub-segment, which looks like this, Lord Capulet is simultaneously doing 2 separate things. He's trying to scold Tybalt and at the same time interact amiably with his friends and guests. So, these lines are him scolding Tybalt, and these lines are him interacting amiably with his friends and guests. And the trick here for Lord Capulet is to alternate between the one mood and the other. This is how Michael Hordem does it from the BBC TV movie. Let's watch this.
Yes, so indeed. This trick may chance to scathe you, I know what. You must contrary me, merit his time. Well said, my heart. You are a princock's goat. Be quiet. Oh, more light. For shame, I'll make you quiet. Surely, my heart.
So that's very well done, almost showing off. And then, immediately after that, we get the vow from Tybalt of revenge for Romeo's intrusion. This is, once again, the late, great Alan Rickman, the Sheriff of Nottingham himself, as Tybalt, in a short but important segment that sets up the events of the 3rd act. This is what that sounds like.
Patience. A force with wealth of colour meeting makes my flesh tremble in their different greeting. I will withdraw, but this intrusion shall now seeming sweet convert to bitterest gall.
At number 5, which was our 6th elimination, eliminated in episode 6, we have the 1936 MGM movie, which we eliminated because of some missed opportunities to make Benvolio's speech from scene 3.1 as complex as it could be. One very enjoyable part from this movie that we will show is Juliet's monologue in Act 4, Scene 3, which is a scene that we completely skipped over. We discussed Juliet drinking the friar's potion in episode 8, but we didn't watch any version of Juliet's monologue in scene 4.3. And this movie contains a very enjoyable version of that monologue. It's enjoyable because, for one thing, this movie cuts out so much from the play, and it seems like it does so much pointless cutting. It's a beautiful thing that they left this monologue mostly intact. It's not 100% intact, but it's almost completely intact, which is more than you're expecting. Juliet in this monologue, remember, is wondering if the potion will kill her or not, if the friar can be trusted, or if she'll wake up in the sepulchre and go insane and kill herself. This specific version of Juliet's monologue, in a certain sense, represents something that will never be duplicated, because it's a once-in-history nexus of two different golden ages. The golden age of Elizabethan playwriting breathed into life by the golden age of Hollywood movie making. So it's unique in that way. Anyway, this is Norma Shearer as Juliet in scene 4.3, beginning with the line, "What if it be a poison?"
What if it be a poison, which the friar subtly hath ministered to have me dead, lest in this marriage he should be dishonored because he married me before to Romeo? I fear it is. And yet methinks it should not, for he hath still been tried a holy man. How if, when I am laid into the tomb, I wake before the time that Romeo come to redeem me? There's a fearful point. Shall I not then be stifled in the vault, to whose foul mouth no healthsome air breathes in? Or if I live, is it not very like the horrible conceit of death and night, together with the terror of the place, where for these many 100 years the bones of all my buried ancestors are packed, where bloody Tybalt, yet but green in earth, lies festering in his shroud, where, as they say at some hours of the night, spirits resort? Alack, alack, is it not like that I, so early waking, what with loathsome smells and shrieks like mandrakes torn out of the earth of living mortals, hearing them run mad? Oh, if I wake, shall I not be distraught, environed with all these hideous fears, and madly play with my forefathers' joints, and pluck the mangled Tybalt from his shroud, and in this rage with some great kinsman's bone, as with a club, dash out my desperate brains? Look! Methinks I see my cousin's ghost, seeking out Romeo that did spit his body upon a rapier's point. Stay, Tybalt, stay! Romeo, I come. This do I drink to thee.
At number 4, we have the 2009 Shakespeare's Globe stage play, which was our 7th elimination, eliminated in episode 7. Episode 7 was our semifinal match between our top 2 stage performances. This version was probably the betting favorite at the beginning of the tournament, and we almost declared it as the champion in episode 6. And I have said that it does contain my favorite version of Romeo, as played by Adetomiwa Edun. But, unfortunately, this version got caught in a weak spot where Romeo was exiled in Mantua, and the 1992 Stratford Juliet was able to get the better of it, making this contestant our 7th elimination. But there are a lot of great things about this version. One cool thing about it that we highlighted in episode 2 was that this version employs a lot from the 1597 Q1 text, which is the less often employed text. One example of this that we didn't show was in Act 3, Scene 1, during Mercutio's dying speech, which we almost completely skipped. We very briefly talked about the line, "I am hurt," in episode 6, but other than that, we didn't study Mercutio's dying speech at all, because we were dealing with too much already, focusing on Benvolio's speech from that scene. But Mercutio's speech is important too, and this version of the play has a pretty unique version of it, different than what you normally hear. Let's listen to this, starting with Romeo's line, Courage, man, the hurt cannot be much. This will be Philip Cumbus as Mercutio.
Courage, man, that cannot be much.
No, 'tis not so deep as a well, nor so wide as a church door. But 'tis enough. 'Twill serve. Ask for me tomorrow, and you shall find me a grave man. I am peppered, I warrant, for this world. Plague of both your houses! Zoons. A dog, a rat, a mouse, a cat, to scratch a man to death. Braggart, a rogue, a villain that fights by the book of arithmetic. He hath made worms meat of me. Yeah!
So far, this is a very standard version of the speech, following both the Q2 text and the first folio text, which are the same, until the line, "He hath made worms meat of me." He hath made worms meat of me, instead of they have made worms meat of me, is following the Q1. The Q1 says he. Also, in the Q2/first folio, that line doesn't come until later. The line in the Q2/first folio is Mercutio's second to last line. In the Q1, the line, "He hath made worms meat of me," comes before "ask for me tomorrow." So in this version, they're compromising and finding a new spot for it, which is immediately following the line, which is a non-Q1 line, that fights by the book of arithmetic. That's where things start to get mixed up.
Why the devil came you between us? I was hurt under your arm.
I thought all for the best.
Pox of your houses. Help me into some house, Benvolio, or I shall faint.
The phrase, "a pox on your houses," is from the Q1. The Q2/first folio speeches never say the word pox. Only the Q1 says the word pox. The Q2 and the first folio always say plague. Mercutio says it 3 times, and all 3 times he says the phrase. The phrase is, "a plague both your houses." In the Q1, Mercutio says pox instead of plague, and he says it 4 times. And he never says the word both. He just says, "a pox on your houses," or "a pox of your houses," never including the word both. In this version that we're watching, Mercutio says plague twice. Once right after he gets stabbed, and the second time, which we heard. Both times he accompanies it with quote-unquote, both your houses. Per the Q2 and first folio, he then, after things start to get mixed up, says, "a pox on your houses." So, plague on both, pox not on both. This is wild stuff. And then, after he says, "help me into some house, Benvolio, or I shall faint," this is where it goes fully into outer orbit. We have a miniature speech here, beginning with the phrase, "I shall be fairly mounted." This whole thing here, this miniature speech, is straight from the Q1, and you almost never hear it. And we're not going to hear it now either, at least not in an unaltered form, because this performance puts its own spin on it. The way it's written here is the way it's written in the Q1. That is, except for the spellings are updated to modern spellings. But with the spellings updated, this is how it's written in the Q1. The performance that we are watching will give the speech so that it looks like this. With the one additional phrase here, I have it and soundly, from the Q2 and first folio. So this is all okay because it's just cutting, copying, and pasting. So everything is fine. Let's listen to how this all sounds.
I shall be fairly mounted upon 4 men's shoulders. And then some base slave, some sexton, some peasantly rogue shall write my epitaph. That Tybalt came and broke the prince's laws, and Mercutio was slain for the first and second cause. I have it and soundly. Come, Benvolio, lend me thy hand. Parks of your houses, this gentleman!
Coming in at number 3, we have the 1968 Franco Zeffirelli movie, which was, you may recall, censored by my 9th grade English teacher for nudity. This contestant was sort of eliminated in episode 8, although not for nudity. It was sort of eliminated for an error that exists in the text. And in episode 8, we only sort of eliminated it because we felt that we couldn't justify fully eliminating it based purely on the fact that its only transgression was remaining faithful to the text as written, error included. So what we decided was that instead of eliminating it fully and officially, we would simply exile it to Mantua. And there it currently exists, exiled in Mantua, which fittingly will be the setting of the bonus clip from this contestant. And Mantua is where we will begin our analysis of Act 5. Because one great part that this movie has is the part in Act 5, Scene 1, when Romeo, in Mantua, receives the news from his servant or associate, Balthazar, that Juliet has died and has been buried in the Capulet tomb. This is what that looks like. Balthazar says, "Oh, pardon me for bringing these ill news, since you did leave it for my office, sir." To which Romeo responds, "Is it even so? Then I defy you, stars." Now, without getting too deep into this, much has been commented about this line by Romeo. This is said to be Romeo's grand descent into complete blasphemy and atheism. By the way, the phrase that Romeo says can be any of the following. Well, it can be anything, but it will be any of the following. Then I defy you, stars. Then I deny you, stars. Or then I defy my stars. Then I defy my stars is from the Q1. You almost never hear that. Not even the 2009 says that. Then I deny you, stars, is from the Q2 and the first folio. And you almost never hear that either. What you almost always hear, as if it's a matter of standard practice, is the Frankenstein mix of the two phrases deny you and defy my to make defy you. Then I defy you, stars. Everyone, it seems, almost everyone, has collectively agreed that that's the best phrasing. The only contestant in our tournament that doesn't employ that Frankenstein mix, 9 out of 10 do, including both finalists. The one that doesn't is the 2018 Royal Shakespeare Company play, which says, "Then I Deny You Stars" from the Q2/First Folio. So extra credit points for the RSC play for being special, although the Shakespeare Showdown show agrees with the popular consensus that I Defy You Stars is the best option. The thing that we're going to focus on is the acting, which includes the direction of the acting. What we want from the acting here is the internal decision being made by Romeo. He can't just hear the news and then proclaim automatically, "Then I defy you stars." If we wanted to, we could show an example of Romeo doing that. We won't, but we could. Romeo needs to do like 3 things at least between hearing the news and proclaiming, "Then I defy you stars." He needs to hear the news, he needs to absorb it, he needs to process it, he needs to consider his options, he needs to make a decision, and then he can proclaim, "Then I defy you stars." And in the Franco Zeffirelli movie, this is what Romeo does. It doesn't take a long investment of time. It only takes a couple seconds, but it's time well spent. Romeo needs to hear the news, absorb it, process it, consider his options, make a decision, and then he can proclaim, "Then I defy you stars." This is how that looks when it's done correctly, in our humble opinion. This will be Leonard Whiting as Romeo, directed by Franco Zeffirelli. Let's watch.
Master Balthazar! How fares my Juliet? For nothing can be ill if she be well. How fares my lady?
She's dead, my lord. She's dead. Her body sleeps in Capel's monument. I saw her laid low in her kindred vault.
Then I defy you, stars!
And as one bonus detail, as Romeo sprints on his horse out of Mantua, we get the second friar, Friar John, arriving in Mantua with his donkey, bearing the letter from Friar Lawrence, which Romeo will miss. A good visual to help the teenagers follow along what's happening here. So, the 1968 Franco Zeffirelli movie comes in at number 3 on our top 10 list. It is not a finalist in this round. However, this contestant, the 1968, is not technically eliminated. Not yet. And because of that fact, there does exist the possibility, the remote possibility, that this contestant could make a bold and triumphant return to Verona in this episode. How that would work remains to be seen. If it does return, and if it's apprehended by the authorities, then it will receive a death sentence. But, as of right now, it remains in exile, and it remains listed at number 3 on our top 10 list. So, this is how spots 10 through 3 look, which brings us to our top 2, which will be the 2 finalists in today's championship match. The loser, obviously, will be our number 2 Romeo and Juliet, and our winner today will be our number 1. But we'll get to those contestants a little bit later. We still have other preliminary work to do. Now, let's talk about Act 5, Scene 2. Act 5, Scene 2 is a short scene involving only 2 characters. Friar Lawrence being one, who we've seen and talked about before. He married Romeo and Juliet. And the other being a whole new character named Friar John, who we just barely saw with his donkey. The whole scene is only 30 lines long by our count. This is when Friar Lawrence finds out, the audience already knows, that Romeo never received the information sent by letter about the drift hatched by him and Juliet. And we're just going to do a really brief bad idea time because we had one idea about this scene that could put a twist on it, possibly a dark twist. What if, both Friar Lawrence and Friar John were played by the same person? In other words, what if you just had one friar on stage? So what do we mean by this? Well, do you remember the Lord of the Rings movies when you had the character Gollum, and Gollum would have a conversation with himself because he had like a split personality. So Gollum would look at his reflection in a puddle of water and he would say something, and then his alter ego in the reflection would respond, like he was having a conversation between 2 people with just himself. Well, what if Friar Lawrence walks out, just like we've seen him throughout the play, and he proceeds to play both friars in one person, having a conversation with just himself? This could be mildly amusing and funny at first, but then it would get suddenly dark and very serious because obviously the audience suddenly realizes that the friar must be deeply, deeply disturbed. To do it, you would need the right actor. You would need a very skilled actor, not just to play both parts, to do 2 distinct voices going back and forth between one and the other, but also they would need the skill to make the turn from amusing and funny at first to suddenly very serious, dark, and disturbed. You need someone with comedy chops, someone with horror chops, someone with traditional Shakespeare chops, and someone who's not afraid to tackle something outrageous from left field. My pick would be John Lithgow. John Lithgow has played Malvolio. He has played King Lear. He was the wild and ridiculous High Commander on the show Third Rock from the Sun. He was also the Trinity Killer, serial killer in the show Dexter. John Lithgow could do it. Anyway, that was today's bad idea time. Just a quick idea that we think could be a wild and new spin on scene 5.2 with the 2 friars. So, with that idea for scene 5.2 being shared, let's begin our study of the 3rd scene of the 5th act. the final scene of the play, the first part. As I said, the final matchup will be concerning Romeo and Juliet's final speeches in the second part. But before we get to that, we need to review the events in the scene leading up to that moment. The scene begins with two people, Paris and Paris's page, arriving at the churchyard, which is like a cemetery, where the Capulet tomb is located. The Capulet tomb is some type of its own structure within the church's cemetery. The Capulets being a rich and high-status family, they have their own tomb or catacomb or sepulcher. Paris and his page are inside the cemetery, but outside the Capulet tomb. Paris tells his page to stand aloof and to watch, and then Paris gives a short speech to Juliet, who is resting lifelessly, but not lifeless, the audience knows, inside the tomb. Anyway, after Paris's speech, Paris's page whistles to Paris that someone is coming, and when Paris hears this, he hides himself in the bushes to watch who it is. Romeo then enters with his own sidekick, Balthazar, and they have with them the tools for breaking into the tomb, like a crowbar or whatnot. Balthazar exits, leaving Romeo by himself with Paris watching him from the bushes, and then Romeo gives his own short speech that begins with, "Thou detestable maw, thou womb of death." And as he says this, he begins to pry open the entrance to the tomb, at which point Paris steps forward to restrain him, saying, "Stop thy unhallowed toil, vile Montague," which leads to Romeo and Paris fighting, which leads to Romeo killing Paris. Now, we're going to watch this, but we're going to watch it from an outside version that is a special guest version that we haven't seen. This is going to be a little different. This is going to be from a source that only contains this one specific moment. We are going to watch this part of the scene as it was performed on the TV sitcom from the 70s called Taxi. This episode of the show Taxi is the 5th episode of the 2nd season, which first aired on the ABC network in the United States on Tuesday, October 16th, 1979. The name of the episode is Wherefore Art Thou Bobby? Here in the show, we have two characters who are playing actors living in New York City, and they are rehearsing the interaction between Paris and Romeo. It's the only part from Romeo and Juliet in the episode, and it only takes a couple minutes. We wanted to show this version because even though it's just a short segment of the scene, it's a nice little demonstration of our subject matter being performed in a minimalist way. No costumes, just rehearsal clothes, no props, and so forth. But yet it still gives the subject matter its proper and respectful due. So let's go ahead and start the scene. There's going to be some preliminary discussion before the actual Shakespeare starts. So we'll watch a little bit and then we'll pause to fill in some details after a couple seconds. Let's start.
Hey, Bobby, could you help me for a minute? I got to set a couple things.
Oh, yeah, sure, I guess so. But listen, as soon as my cab is ready, I'm going to have to go.
Oh, it's terrific. Here, Steve. Yeah, here, it's the scene between Romeo and Paris in the last act, the fight scene. It's right here.
Yeah, I think I remember this.
We'll say this is Juliet's tomb. Oh, excuse me.
All right.
Okay, you ready?
Yeah, sure.
I'll start. Yeah.
So what's happening here is the guy in the white shirt and beige pants is a character named Steve, played by Michael Horton in a one-episode guest appearance by him. He's normally not in the show. The character Steve moved to New York City to become an actor, and he was cast as Romeo, which is why he needs to rehearse for Romeo. The guy in the black leather jacket standing by the candy bar machine is a character named Bobby, played by Jeff Conaway. He is a regular character in the show, and he's been an aspiring actor for many years. And in this episode, he decides to quit acting. So he's decided to quit acting, and he's going to eat a candy bar here, acting like he doesn't care about acting anymore. That's the premise here. Let's continue.
Thou detestable maw, thou womb of death, gorged with the dearest morsel of the earth, thus I enforce thy rotten jaws to open, and in despite I'll cram thee with more food.
This is that banished 40 Montague that murdered my little cousin. This brief is supposed to be the first one to die.
Bobby, I appreciate your help, but could you give me a little more?
Actors.
So, notwithstanding the extra lines interjected here between the Shakespeare lines, this scene is actually very faithful to the text. And from this point forward, it will be completely faithful. Let's continue with the line, "This is that banished, haughty Montague."
This is that banished, haughty Montague that murdered my love's cousin. With which grief it's supposed the fair creature died. And here is come to do some villainous shame to the dead bodies. I will apprehend him. Stop thy unhallowed toil, vile Montague. Can vengeance be pursued further than death? Condemned villain, I do apprehend thee. Obey and go with me, for thou must die.
I must indeed, and therefore came I hither. Good, gentle youth, tempt not a desperate man. Fly hence, leave me. Think upon these gone, let them affright thee. I beseech thee, youth, put not another sin upon my head by urging me to fury. Oh, be gone, by heaven, I love thee better than myself, were I come hither armed against myself. Stay not, be gone, live, and hereafter say a madman's mercy bade thee run away.
I do defy thy conjurations and apprehend thee for a felon here.
Wilt thou provoke me? Then have at thee, boy!
Yes! Oh! 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 I am slain. If thou be merciful, open the tomb, lay me with Juliet.
So this version contains probably my favorite version of the character Paris. At least it's one of my more favorite versions of Paris's death. Usually Paris is portrayed as, the butt of a joke, which can be good for some comic relief. He's usually portrayed as some sort of pretty boy or fancy pants, something along those lines. He's not usually treated super sympathetically, but I think when it comes time for him to die, letting him die nobly with honor is a good decision, which they do here. The fight here obviously wasn't a long drawn-out affair. It was just a single pantomimed lunge by Romeo. If a long drawn-out affair is what you're looking for, then I would direct you to the 1936 MGM movie. The sword fight between Romeo and Paris in that movie goes on for a couple minutes. In any event, after Paris dies, Romeo is now the only one left on stage, besides maybe the sleeping Juliet. This is where Romeo begins his long final speech. So let's go ahead and pull this up. Now, in the first part of the speech, he addresses the dead Paris, whom he has just killed, and he discovers that it is, in fact, County Paris, which Romeo didn't know while he was fighting him, because it was too dark, which is why it should be after 10 p.m., which we talked about in the last episode. But anyway, Romeo carries Paris into the Capulet Monument. He gives Paris a little tribute, and then once that business is concluded, he turns his attention away from Paris toward Juliet. And it is at this point that the concluding events of Romeo and Juliet's lives will unfold. And it is at this point in the scene where we will stop and we will officially begin the final match in our Romeo and Juliet showdown. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to tonight's main event. In the red corner, we have the 1992 Stratford Festival stage performance from the Stratford Festival in Stratford, Ontario, Canada, directed by Richard Monette, starring Anthony Simolino as Romeo and Megan Follows as Juliet. In the blue corner, we have the 1996 Baz Luhrmann directed movie version of the play, starring Leonardo DiCaprio as Romeo and Claire Danes as Juliet. By way of making our introductions officially complete, and in order to warm up both contestants, we will watch one scene from both contestants, and it will be the same scene for both. The scene that we will watch will be the second half of scene 5.1. The first half of scene 5.1 is when Romeo says, "Then I defy you stars," which we already heard. The second half of scene 5.1 is when Romeo visits an apothecary to acquire a dram of poison which he will need for his final self-sacrifice. This is just to get both contestants warmed up. So this is the second half of scene 5.1, first by the 1992 play. Let's watch.
O mischief, thou art swift to enter in the thoughts of desperate men. I do remember an apothecary, and hereabouts it dwells. As I remember, this should be the house. Being holiday, the beggar's shop is shut. What ho! Apothecary!
Who calls so loud?
Come hither, man. I see that thou art poor. There is 40 ducats. Let me have a dram of poison.
Oh, such mortal drugs I have, but Mantua's law is death to any he that utters them.
Art thou so bare and full of wretchedness and fierce to die? Famine is in thy cheeks. Need and oppression starveth in thy eyes. Contempt and beggary hangs upon thy back. The world is not thy friend, nor the world's law. The world affords no law to make thee rich. And be not poor, but break it and take this.
My poverty, but not my will, consents.
I pay thy poverty, and not thy will.
Put this in any liquid thing you will, and drink it off. And if you had the strength of 20 men, it would dispatch you straight.
There is thy gold. Worse poison to men's souls than these poor compounds thou mayst not sell. I sell thee poison. Thou hast so mean none. Farewell.
And now, the scene as done by the 1996 movie. Let's watch.
a dram of poison, such soon speeding gear as will disperse itself through all the veins, that the life-weary taker may fall dead.
Such mortal drugs I have, but Verona law is death, any he that utters them.
The world is not thy friend, nor the world's law. Then be not poor, but break it and take this.
My poverty, but not my will consents.
I pay thy poverty, and not thy will.
Drink it off, and if you had the strength of 20 men, it would dispatch you straight.
There's my gold. Worse poison to men's souls than these poor compounds that thou mayst not sell.
And with that, we will begin the final showdown. Let's begin. The way that this contest will work will be as follows. Our subject matter, as already explained, will be the final speeches of Romeo and Juliet. Romeo's comes first, and his is much longer than Juliet's. Juliet's can barely be described as a speech. As we follow these speeches, as the scene unfolds, both contestants will be given a series of what we will call tests. These tests will serve as our final exam questions. For every test, each contestant will either pass or fail. If a contestant successfully passes a test, they will be awarded 1 point, like this. If a contestant fails a test, they will be penalized with 1 strike, like this. The contest will be decided following the same scoring format as the game Yambo, which was the trivia game from the old Late Late Show starring Craig Kilborn. The scoring format from that game, the Yambo game, is as follows. When either contestant reaches either 3 points or 3 strikes, then the match is over. If a contestant reaches 3 points before the other, they will automatically be declared the winner. On the other hand, if a contestant reaches 3 strikes before the other, they will automatically be declared the loser, and their opponent will be declared the winner by default. That's Yambo scoring, and that's how the scoring in the final match will work. Now, what will be our criteria for this match? Well, when the play eventually comes to its very final conclusion, after Romeo and Juliet are dead, the prince will come again one final time, and part of what the prince says will be the line, "For never was a story of more woe." So, during our main event today, the thing that we will be paying attention to is the emotion of woe, which is defined as great sadness or a misfortune causing such sadness. So we will be paying attention to how much woe there is, and also what kind of woe it is. Not only because of the prince's line, but also because of the full title of the play, at least as it appears on the title page of the 1599 Q2, which is "The Most Excellent and Lamentable Tragedy of Romeo and Juliet." We are looking for woe that is excellent. We are looking for woe that is lamentable and tragic. If Capulet and Montague are the 2 foes mentioned in the prologue, then this battle will be the battle of the 2 woes. So, without any further ado, let's continue with the scene. We'll begin where we left off. After Romeo turns his attention away from Paris toward Juliet. We'll watch about a minute from each contestant for some preliminary context, just to get a sense of what everything looks like and what we're looking at exactly. And then we'll begin the textual analysis, starting with the 1992 play. This is Romeo approaching the buried Juliet, who is lying under the stage. He will be reciting a short part of his speech, which looks like this, starting with the line, "I'll bury thee in a triumphant grave," speaking to Paris. This is what that looks like.
I'll bury thee in a triumphant grave. A grave? Oh, no. A lantern, slaughtered youth. For here lies Juliet, and her beauty makes this vault a feasting presence, full of light.
Okay, and now for some preliminary context from the 96 movie. But before we watch this, there is something that needs to be made clear about our two finalists. They are going to be significantly different. Obviously, one is a live play performed on stage in a theater. The other is a movie. The 96 movie will not be receiving extra points for its lavish music, although that will be enjoyable. But more than just that, there's going to be significant differences regarding what happens in the story. In the 96 movie, for example, Juliet will not kill herself with a dagger. She will use a gun. This isn't a huge problem for us because we will be primarily focused on the written dialogue. Regarding the written dialogue, there will still be major differences between the contestants. For example, in the play, as it's written, after Romeo dies, Friar Lawrence enters the vault, and the friar is the first person who Juliet sees after she wakes up. Her first words after waking up should be, "O comfortable friar." The 92 play will include this part. Despite having some guns used instead of swords, it's still a pretty traditional version. Romeo actually kills Paris with a gun in this version. But in most respects, it's still a pretty traditional version, and it will include the friar entering the vault between when Romeo dies and when Juliet wakes up. The part where the friar enters the vault, however, is missing from the 96 movie. So, be aware, things are going to be different. In this clip, we will see Romeo discovering Juliet, who is resting inside this cathedral-type building in like a state for public view. This won't have any spoken lines in it. This is just for context. But let's watch this. Alright, so let's begin our analysis. When Romeo begins to closely examine his wife, he is surprised and a little perplexed at what he sees. He remarks, "Death that hath sucked the honey of thy breath hath had no power yet upon thy beauty. Thou art not conquered. Beauty's ensign yet is crimson in thy lips and in thy cheeks, and death's pale flag is not advanced there. This segment of Romeo's speech will be test number 1, and the name of test number 1 will be Cruel and Ironic Details. Why are these cruel and ironic? Well, they're ironic because the audience knows something that Romeo doesn't know, that there is a reason for the crimson in Juliet's lips and cheeks, that she is alive. And not only is she in fact alive, which would be cruel enough, but she's also on the verge of concluding her quote-unquote borrowed likeness of shrunk death and returning to full consciousness. She must be, because remember, in scene 4.5, when Lord Capulet first discovers Juliet under the effects of the potion, his observations of her were that she was cold, stiff, with blood settled, with life and lips separated, and with the countenance of quote-unquote frost. That's a stark difference from crimson in thy lips and in thy cheeks. Well, it must be because her warm countenance is returning to her. This is obvious to the audience, but it's unbeknownst to Romeo, and it's tragic for Romeo, even if it's your first time watching and you honestly don't know the end of the play. The irony increases the suspense and the amount of woe that we ultimately feel, which is why we deem this segment as crucially necessary. So let's see how both sides do it. First, the 92 play. Let's listen.
Oh, my love, my wife, death that hath sucked the honey of thy breath hath had no power yet upon my beauty. Thou art not conquered. Beauty's ensign yet is crimson in thy lips and in thy cheeks, and death's pale flag is not advanced there.
And next, the 96 movie. Let's listen.
My wife, death that hath sucked the honey of thy breath hath had no power yet upon thy beauty. Thou art not conquered. Beauty's ensign yet is crimson in thy lips and in thy cheeks, and death's pale flag is not advanced there.
Alright, so, since both versions include this critical segment, both contestants therefore receive 1 point. Well done by both contestants. Moving on. In the next part of Romeo's speech, he turns his attention away from Juliet to a fourth individual in the tomb, if you include the dead Paris, and that individual is the dead Tybalt. Romeo's speech at this moment looks like this. He says, "Tybalt, liest thou there in thy bloody sheet? Oh, what more favor can I do thee, than with that hand that cut thy youth in twain, to sunder his that was thine enemy? Forgive me, cousin." This segment will constitute test number 2, and the name of test number 2 will be The Forgiveness of Tybalt. This is an important moment. It sidetracks Romeo a little bit from the attention he's giving to Juliet, which some may feel isn't ideal, and it's probably why it oftentimes gets removed, but in the opinion of the Shakespeare Showdown show, it should remain, and we are marking it as crucially necessary because, for one thing, it makes Romeo a more respectable and more sympathetic character. We don't want a Romeo that murders Tybalt in Paris without any remorse, like a homicidal maniac. We want a Romeo that genuinely regrets killing Tybalt and that genuinely asks for Tybalt's forgiveness. This is a more three-dimensional Romeo, and it enhances the woe that we feel. It also echoes, or perhaps foreshadows is a better word, similar events that will happen in other plays. In the final scene of Hamlet, for example, Prince Hamlet asks forgiveness from Laertes. In King Lear asks forgiveness from Cordelia. These are extremely delicate and important events in those plays, and in the whole body of Shakespeare's canon and in the whole body of English literature. We feel Romeo belongs in this same category, which is why it should remain, in our humble opinion. Unfortunately, I regret to inform you, neither one of our final contestants includes it. It is omitted in both the 92 play and the 96 movie. Therefore, for this test, both the 92 play and the 96 movie receive a strike, which leaves both contestants now with exactly 1 point and 1 strike. Now, this is where things get interesting, because this part of Romeo's speech, when he asks for Tybalt's forgiveness, is included in the 1968 movie, the contestant that's languishing in exile. Well, because it is included in that version, and because it isn't included by either of our finalists, let's go ahead and watch that part from the 68 movie, so that we get to see it at least once. This is Romeo asking forgiveness from the buried Tybalt from the 1968 Franco Zeffirelli movie, starting with Beauty's ensign speaking to Juliet, and then Romeo will shift his attention to the dead Tybalt. Let's watch this.
Beauty's ensign yet is crimson in thy lips and in thy cheeks. Death's pale flag is not advanced there. Tybalt. Liest thou there in thy bloody sheet? What more favour can I do to thee than with that hand that cut thy youth in twain, to sunder his that was thine enemy? Forgive me, cousin.
So there you have it, the 1968 movie, which we are merely keeping a close eye on for now. It isn't officially receiving any points or strikes. We're just keeping a close eye on it, and we will make a mental note that it does deserve some brownie points for including this important part of Romeo's speech. And also, obviously, it would have also passed test number 1, the cruel and ironic details. So this version would have passed both tests. Moving on once again. After a little bit of extra cruel irony about Juliet looking fair, Romeo moves on to the next part of his speech, in which he engages in some personification. The personification of death, to be exact. He says, "Shall I believe that unsubstantial death is amorous, and that the lean, abhorred monster keeps thee here in dark to be his paramour?" We are going to mark this part as crucially important, and it will be our test number 3. And we'll call test number 3 the substantiation of unsubstantial death. Why is this important? Well, by personifying death in this way, making death now the 5th character inside the tomb, counting Paris and Tybalt, it's getting rather crowded. It adds yet another dimension to the woe that we are feeling. It adds the dimension of jealousy, which is certainly a monster. It creates a sort of love triangle between Romeo, Juliet, and death. Romeo is jealous of Juliet. Death is also jealous of Juliet, and Romeo is jealous of Juliet's death with a lowercase d as he approaches his own doom. This brings up a feeling that we felt at least once before in Act 3, Scene 2. We didn't cover that scene in this show, but we felt that feeling when we read the play. The feeling comes when the nurse tries to deliver the news to Juliet that Tybalt is dead. The nurse cries, "Alack the day, he's gone, he's killed, he's dead." And Juliet, not yet aware that the nurse is talking about Tybalt, worries that she's talking about Romeo, and she says, "Can heaven be so envious?" So in that scene, for a brief moment, Juliet, thinking Romeo was dead when he wasn't, felt jealous. And now in this scene, Romeo, thinking Juliet is dead when she isn't, is now the one who's jealous. This is actually included by both finalists. So let's watch how they do it. First, the 92 play. Let's listen.
Oh, dear Juliet, why art thou yet so fair? Shall I believe that unsubstantial death is amorous, and that the lean, abhorred monster keeps thee here in dark to be his paramour?
All right, and now the 96 movie. Let's listen.
Dear Juliet, why art thou yet so fair? Shall I believe that unsubstantial death is amorous, and keeps thee here in dark to be his paramour?
So both contestants make the correct decision here. This is well done by both of them, and they will both receive another point. Making the score now tied at 2 points and 1 strike each. And by the way, if you're wondering about the 1968 movie, if it includes this part, the answer is yes, it does. And it also deserves a mention. More than a mention, actually. Let's go ahead and watch this. The 1968 movie has earned it. This is Unsubstantial Death from the 1968. Let's listen.
Oh, dear Juliet,
Why art thou yet so fair? Shall I believe that unsubstantial death is amorous, and that the lean abhorred monster keeps the ear in dark to be his paramour?
So, if the 1968 movie was receiving points and strikes, which it's not, it should be noted that it would be 3 for 3 if it was. All right, now we never did establish any hard guidelines about how this contestant could come out of exile, but since it has acquitted itself very well, as we've kept an eye on it, let's go ahead and make a decision about that right now. Right now, our two finalists, the 92 play and the 96 movie, are tied at 2 points and 1 strike each, which means that they're both 1 point away from claiming victory. So what we will say regarding the 1968 movie, In Exile, is that if both the 92 play and the 96 movie fail the next test, and the 68 movie can pass the next test, that is, test number 4, which would make it 4 for 4, then we will bring back the 1968 movie into championship contention. If both finalists fail the next test and the 68 can pass it, then we will bring back the 68 out of exile. It won't have any points or strikes on the scoreboard officially, so it won't win, but it will be back. That is our stance moving forward. So, with that stance being made official, let's go ahead and continue with Romeo's speech. The next segment of Romeo's speech is about 10 lines long, and in this segment we actually won't mark anything as crucially important as far as literary devices go. But that isn't to say there isn't some good details in here, or good devices. Worms as chambermaids, as a metaphor, for instance, does sound cool. Inauspicious Stars brings in a theme that's been repeated ever since the prologue, and we heard Romeo curse his stars in Mantua. And when Romeo says, "Eyes, look your last, arms, take your last embrace, and lips, O you the doors of breath, seal with a righteous kiss, a dateless bargain to engrossing death." That's an interesting device in which Romeo addresses his own body parts directly. I'm not even sure what the word for that is, but it sounds awesome. These details are nice, and they are virtually always included, especially the part about the eyes, the arms, and the lips, because that sets up Romeo's very last line, which is, "Thus with a kiss I die." But we're not going to mark anything as crucially important from this part, because there's nothing really controversial here, we don't think. For test number 4, we are going to skip to the next part and consider Romeo's very last words before he dies, which are, "Come, bitter conduct, come, unsavory guide, thou desperate pilot, now at once run on the dashing rocks, thy seasick weary bark." Then he says, "Here's to my love," with the direction, drinking, and then he drinks the poison, and then, "O true apothecary, thy drugs are quick, thus with a kiss I die." This will be the basis for test number 4. We'll call this test Desperate Pilot / True Apothecary. And test number 4 will have 2 parts. So we are going to have two tests rolled into one. The first part of this test is about the two lines starting with, "Thou desperate pilot." These lines are a direct reference to something Romeo says in Act 1, Scene 4, which is a scene that we briefly talked about in Episode 4. At the end of that scene, Romeo says, "But he that hath the steerage of my course, direct my sail." And here, at the end of the story, at the end of his life, Romeo declares, "Now at once run on the dashing rocks, thy seasick weary bark." This figurative imagery was also touched on by Lord Capulet in Act 3, Scene 5. So, because we get it in Act 1, the first act, and we get it in Act 3, the middle act, we should also get it in Act 5, the final act, to complete the triplet. In fact, we're saying that it's crucially necessary that we get it. The second part of this test is the line, "O true apothecary, thy drugs are quick." And this is going to be a little different because we are going to say that in the ideal version of Romeo's speech, according to our show, the Shakespeare Showdown show, in our humble opinion, this line should not be included. It should be excluded. This will be the first test that prescribes removing specific lines, but we feel strongly about this because, in our humble opinion, there really is no compelling reason to include it, and it's fairly distracting. It seemingly serves no other function besides endorsing the efficacy of the apothecary's poison. It sounds like a positive customer feedback, which is a weird thing to include at the climax of the play. So we're saying that it should not be included. And it's not as if these are Romeo's very, very last words. His absolute last words are, "Thus with a kiss I die." And those words, being Romeo's absolute last words, shouldn't be tampered with. Those words should always be Romeo's last words. So, Romeo should, in order, 1. Tell his lips to kiss Juliet and kiss her. Now, to interject in the order here of what Romeo should do when he kisses her exactly is something that varies. But he should tell his lips to kiss her, and he should kiss her. 2. Address his vial of poison, saying, "Come, bitter conduct, come, unsavory guide." 3. Say the lines about the desperate pilot dashing against the rocks. 4. He should drink the poison. 5. Romeo should not say the true apothecary line. This omission should be included. The omission should be included. 6. He should then say his final words, "Thus, with a kiss I die," at which point he dies. And actually, looking closely at this, if you remove the words, "O true apothecary, thy drugs are quick," and you put the 6 syllables, "Thus with a kiss I die," immediately after the 4 syllables, "Here's to my love," you get one complete 10-syllable line. "Here's to my love, thus with a kiss I die," which we feel justifies us in making this recommendation. So, in order for a contestant to receive a point for this test, they must satisfy both of the following criteria. They must include the lines that start with "Thou desperate pilot," and they must also exclude the line "O true apothecary" and "Thy drugs are quick." If they do both of these things, they will receive a point. If they fail to do both of these things, in other words, if they fail in either respect, they will receive a strike. First, let's look at the 92 play. Let's just watch this and hear how they do it. These are Romeo's dying words from the Stratford. Let's listen.
Come, bitter conduct. Come, unsavory guide, thou desperate pilot. Now at once run on the dashing rocks thy seasick, weary bark. Here's to my love. Oh, true apothecary, thy drugs are quick. Thus, with a kiss, I die.
And as Romeo dies, we can see Juliet beginning to stir immediately after Romeo's last lines. And in this performance, Romeo kisses Juliet after the words, "Thus with a kiss," but before the words, "I die." So what we see is the inclusion of the desperate pilot line and also the inclusion of the true apothecary line. This constitutes a fail, and the 1992 play thus is given a strike, which is its second strike, and it is now one strike away from automatic defeat. What about the 96 movie? Well, I will tell you that we are not going to watch the 96 version of this sequence because, for one thing, opposite of the 92 play, which includes both Desperate Pilot and True Apothecary, and failed, this movie actually excludes both Desperate Pilot and True Apothecary, also constituting a fail. So there's nothing to watch. Remember, we're looking for Desperate Pilot, but no True Apothecary. So the 96 movie thus is given a strike 2. Which makes the score now tied yet again, albeit for different reasons. We now stand at 2 points and 2 strikes each. Both finalists are 1 point away from victory and 1 strike away from defeat. This contest will come down to Juliet's speech to decide the winner. Now, what about the 1968 movie In Exile? What does the 68 movie do? Because we said that if the 68 movie could pass this test, then we would bring it out of exile into the championship. Well, once again, we don't need to watch anything because I will just go ahead and tell you that the 68 movie, similar to the 96 movie, excludes both Desperate Pilot and True Apothecary. It doesn't include either of those, thus rendering the 1968 movie now officially ineligible to come out of exile and finally invalidated and eliminated from the Romeo and Juliet Showdown. A valiant effort, to be sure, from the Franco Zeffirelli movie. Now, at this time, we would like to take a brief break from the championship action, since our finalists are tied at 2 points and 2 strikes each, and the 68 movie is now properly eliminated. We are going to take the opportunity to check in with the rest of our eliminated contestants, just to see how they would have fared in our first 4 tests. So, let's bring back the top 10 list, and let's just quickly review how all of these contestants would have scored on the first 4 tests. The 1968 movie we saw would have passed the first 3 tests, but not the 4th. To its credit, 3 out of 4 is better than either finalists, so it was a valiant effort. The 2009 Shakespeare's Globe play actually would have passed the first, failed the second, passed the third, and failed the fourth, because similar to the 92 Stratford play, its nemesis from episode 7, it includes both Desperate Pilot and True Apothecary. It includes too much. The 1936 movie would have passed the first, failed the second, also failed the third, and also failed the fourth, once again for including too much, because it includes True Apothecary. The 1978 BBC TV movie would have passed the first, passed the second, passed the third, but failed the fourth. It would have failed the fourth for excluding both Desperate Pilot and True Apothecary, doing exactly on all 4 tests what the 68 movie did. The 2018 RSC play would have passed the first, passed the second, failed the third, and also failed the fourth. It would have failed the fourth for excluding Desperate Pilot and for including True Apothecary, which is the exact opposite of our prescription for test number 4. And this is the only contestant to do it like that. The 1976 Thames TV movie would have passed the first, passed the second, passed the third, but failed the fourth for including too much, which is entirely predictable, because it just includes everything. It's the only contestant to just include everything, including, to its credit, the forgiveness of Tybalt in test number 2. But it fails test number 4, obviously. The 2013 Broadway play would have passed the first, failed the second, passed the third, and failed the fourth for yet again including too much, which is the same result as the 92 play and the 09 play. This seems to be the most popular version of Romeo's speech, excluding Romeo's petition for forgiveness by Tybalt, but including the True Apothecary line, which we don't agree with at all. It seems so obvious to us that Romeo's petition for forgiveness is way more tender and dynamic than the positive customer feedback, but excluding the forgiveness and including the customer feedback apparently is the most popular course of action, especially amongst stage performances. You may think that it's more difficult to include Tybalt in a stage performance, but the 2018 RSC play did it to its credit, and also, obviously, the play is written to be performed on stage, so that's no excuse. The 1954 Renato Castellani movie interestingly, and uniquely would have passed the first, passed the second, passed the third, and passed the fourth. It actually does include the desperate pilot line while excluding the true apothecary line, which is what we said was our ideal combination, and which not a single other contestant accomplished, making it not only the one and only contestant that would have passed the fourth test, but also the one and only contestant out of 10 to demonstrate a perfect 4 for 4 performance overall, which raises a conundrum of sorts. We said of the 1968 movie that if that version went 4 for 4, we would bring it out of exile. Should we, for its accomplishment, bring back the 1954 movie? Well, the 1968 movie was special because it wasn't ever officially eliminated when we said that. It was merely banished to exile in Mantua, which made it a special case and a unique candidate to make a return. The 1954 movie isn't in that category. The 1954 movie was fully and officially eliminated. However, because the subject of this tournament is Romeo and Juliet, and because in Romeo and Juliet, Juliet is declared dead and buried in a tomb, only to rise again from the tomb, we feel like it would be appropriate, maybe morbidly appropriate, if one of our contestants could rise again from a state of seemingly irreversible death. And if we brought back the 1954 movie, that's exactly what would happen. What do you think? Should we do it? I say we do it. Let's do it. Let's bring back the 1954 Renato Castellani movie. The 1954 Renato Castellani movie is now uneliminated, resurrected from the dead, and will now join our other two finalists in the final round of this tournament. Congratulations to the 1954 Renato Castellani movie. So, where does this put us now? Well, we have our two original finalists, both on the brink of elimination and on the brink of victory, plus the 1954 movie, back from the dead. I said it was resurrected, but that's probably not the best way to describe it. A better description would be that it is a reanimated contender, like a zombie contender. And to be clear, before we proceed, this zombie version of the play isn't competing with exactly the same standing as our two original finalists, because it's not a true finalist. It's only a zombie finalist. So it doesn't have any points and it doesn't have any strikes. We demonstrated only that it would have scored a perfect 4 for 4. If it had 4 points, it would automatically be the champion. It currently has 0 points, and as a zombie contender, we are declaring that it cannot earn any points or strikes. But neither the 92 play nor the 96 movie can be crowned as champion until this zombie menace is quashed. So where do we go from here? Well, I think we should proceed carefully with the play, but before we move on to the next part of the play, we should, for the sake of appreciation, watch some clips from the 1954 movie from tests 1 through 4, which we haven't seen yet. So let's watch these quickly to get a sense of what we're dealing with here. Test number 1, if you recall, was the cruel and ironic details test. The 1954 movie includes that part, and this is what that sounds like. This will be Lawrence Harvey as Romeo. Let's listen to this part. This is the cruel and ironic details. Let's watch.
Death that hath sucked the honey of thy breath hath had no power yet upon thy beauty. Thou art not conquering. Beauty's ensign yet is crimson in thy lips and in thy cheeks, and death's pale flag is not advanced there.
Okay, and after that we get test number 2, which was the Forgiveness of Tybalt test. The 1954 includes that also, and this is what that sounds like. Let's listen.
Tybalt, liest thou there in thy bloody sheet? Oh, what more favour can I do to thee than with that hand that cut thy youth in twain, to sunder his that was thine enemy? Forgive me, cousin.
And after that, we get test number 3, which is the Substantiation of Unsubstantial Death test. The 1954 includes that, and this is what that sounds like.
Oh, dear Juliet, why art thou yet so fair? Shall I believe that unsubstantial death is amorous, and that the lean of horrid monster keeps thee here in dark to be his paramour? For fear of that, I still will stay with thee, and never from this palace of dim night depart again.
Now, test number 4 is where things get complicated and controversial, because there is a big reason why the line about, "O true apothecary, thy drugs are quick," is not included. The reason it's not included is because in this version, Romeo doesn't visit an apothecary, and he doesn't kill himself with poison. He kills himself with a dagger, employing Juliet's traditional method. With that information out of the bag, let's go ahead and watch this and see how it looks. Romeo will call his dagger bitter conduct, which we suppose works just fine. But anyway, this is Romeo with a dagger from the 1954. Let's watch this.
Come, bitter conduct. Come, unsavory guide. Thou desperate pilot. Now at once run on the dashing rocks, thy seasick, weary bark.
By the way, Romeo implementing a dagger to kill himself isn't the only creative liberty being taken with respect to weapons in this version. Romeo's method for killing Paris is also unique. Instead of stabbing him in a sword fight, Romeo instead uses this heavy post-like object to inflict blunt force trauma to Paris's skull. Let's watch that very quickly while we're on the topic. This is Romeo killing Paris in the cemetery, starting with I do defy thy conjurations.
I do defy thy conjurations and apprehend thee for a felon here. Oh. If thou be merciful, open the tomb. Lay me with Juliet.
Okay, time to get back on track. We are still in a pickle here with this zombie menace. We could, if we wanted, take the easy way out and re-eliminate the 1954 movie on the grounds that it changes Romeo's mode of suicide. But we don't believe that would be a valid course of action to take because it doesn't necessarily violate any of our original guidelines. The line about the true apothecary is omitted because there is no poison, but there's nothing wrong with that because omissions, we said, were fine in general, and we even said the scene was better without that line. There is a stage direction that directs Romeo to drink, but that direction can be omitted, no different than a line of speech can be omitted. There is no new line being added to Romeo's speech, which would be a grave mistake, and it's a guideline violation that this movie is guilty of in other scenes, but it's not a violation being committed here, so we won't penalize this version for the dagger alone. We need something more substantial. So let's continue with this play and see where it leads us. The next thing that happens in the play is, after Romeo dies, but before Juliet wakes up, Friar Lawrence enters the tomb, briefly. In the 96 movie, this doesn't happen, as already explained. We will deal with the 96 movie in a minute. For now, we will skip ahead to after the friar leaves the tomb and Juliet is alone with Romeo once again. But now she's the one who is awake and alive and Romeo is dead. I must say that the friar, when he is briefly in the tomb with Juliet, does have one excellent line, which is when he says to Juliet, "A greater power than we can contradict hath thwarted our intents." That's a good line. Not crucially required, but pretty dang good. Anyway, moving on to Juliet's speech, she only has a handful of lines. She says 4 lines to the friar if the friar is present. Then, when it's just her and Romeo together, she has about 10 lines in total. And this should be all that we need to clear up this zombie menace and also to determine who our final champion will be once and for all. We are going to walk through this slowly, line by line, and for each part of this, we will watch a clip from the 92 play. We're not doing any points or strikes at this time. We're simply watching clips from the 92 as examples of these lines to hear them and to get familiar with this sequence. In this sequence, Juliet is going to experience 3 disasters or 3 sources of woe in a row. In a woe? 3 sources of woe in a woe? Anyway, when Juliet first sees her husband, she asks, "What's here, a cup closed in my true love's hand?" And then comes the answer, "Poison, I see, hath been his timeless end." This event, discovering her dead husband, is the first disaster and her main source of woe. Okay, let's watch this. This is Juliet with the friar at the beginning, and then she will discover Romeo with the empty vial as the friar is leaving the vault. This is that part from the 92. Let's listen.
Oh, a greater power than we can contradict hath thwarted our intents. Come, away. Thy husband in thy bosom there lies dead.
Leave, boy!
Stay not to question, for the watch is coming. Come. Go, good Juliet. I dare no longer stay.
Go! Get the ends, for I will not away. What's this? A cup closed in my true love's hand? Poison, I see, has been his timeless end.
So that's the first disaster. This woe that Romeo is dead is so terrible that it prompts her to immediately look for any remaining poison for herself to drink. She tries to drink from the vial, and she is disappointed to find that there is no more poison. Romeo has, quote, drunk all and left no friendly drop to help me after. This source of woe, the disappointment that there's no poison left, is a relatively minor one compared to the first, but it's a terrible disaster nonetheless because it perpetuates the first disaster. To describe the poison, she uses the adjective friendly and the verb to help. Let's watch this. This is Juliet's second disaster.
Oh, churl, drunk all and left no friendly drop to help me after.
Third, she looks for more poison on Romeo's lips. Now, she may or may not be literally looking for poison or fully expecting to find some. She could just be poetically saying this as she goes in for one last kiss, one final act of tenderness. Regardless, when she kisses him, she makes the third woeful discovery, not only that there's no poison to be found on his lips, but that his lips are warm, which is her own cruel detail, indicating that she only barely missed him, which is terribly woeful. I'm sure we can all agree it's cruel that her and the friar's intents were thwarted, but it's even more cruel, excellently so, that they were so close. It's an extra woeful and extra cruel misfortune. Let's watch this. This is the third part and the third woeful discovery by Juliet.
I will kiss thy lips. Happily some poison yet doth hang on them to make me die with a restorative. Thy lips are warm.
Which way?
So, those are the three sources of woe. But we are not done here. Let's back up one step to when Juliet first looks for more poison from inside the vial. When she finds the vial empty, she says, "Drunk all and left no friendly drop to help me after?" We need to talk about this because there's more woe to be found in here. Unlike no poison being found in the vial, there's more woe to be found in this line that's more subtle than what we already discussed. Her complaint, which is that there is no drop of poison left, if you'll indulge me here, has a very, shall we say, banal domestic ring to it. Okay, it's as if she and Romeo are happily married, living in a cottage somewhere, let's say, and she one morning is casually hoping for some orange juice for breakfast. So she goes to the fridge and grabs the carton of orange juice, only to discover that the carton of orange juice is empty because her silly husband has drunk all of it selfishly and left no drop for her, and he has inconsiderately put the carton back in the fridge. This little hypothetical episode is exactly the sort of banal detail of happily married life that she now realizes she can kiss goodbye forever with Romeo. It's as if she's saying, well, this marriage may be doomed, but for just one moment, I'm going to pretend that we're living happily ever after, and I'm going to invoke this common complaint from vanilla domestic life that my husband inconsiderately drank all the juice and left none for me. What a goofy husband I have. There is a little bit of that in there. It's subtle, but it's there. Let's watch this one more time, now thinking about this additional and subtle meaning. Let's listen.
Oh, churl, drunk all and left no friendly drop to help me after?
Feel free to disagree, but we feel strongly that it's in there. In episode number 4, I said I couldn't abide Juliet complaining to Romeo. But here it's okay because now we're at the tragic end, and this is going to be Juliet's only chance to experience vanilla domestic life. In fact, we are going to make that line a special edition anti-zombie requirement in our anti-zombie efforts. The 1954 zombie movie does not have a vial of poison and therefore doesn't give those words to Juliet. In that movie, when Juliet wakes up, she discovers the dead Romeo. She doesn't try to drink out of any vial because there isn't one. She does kiss him, and she does discover his lips are warm, which is tragic, but she never says the line, "Drunk all and left no friendly drop to help me after." She merely gazes at him tragically and then decides to kiss him. So she suffers the effects of the first disaster, the main source of woe, and the effects of the third source of woe, which is better than nothing, but she doesn't suffer from either the obvious and superficial woe nor the subtle woe from the second disaster. And because of that, we will eliminate the 1954 Renato Castellani movie for the second time in this tournament, and it will go back to its position at number 10 on our top 10 list. A valiant effort, I must say. But with that, the zombie menace is now quashed. Okay, now let's continue from where we left off. The next thing that happens after Juliet says, "Thy lips are warm," is a watchman is supposed to yell, "Which way?" which we heard. Juliet then says, "Yea, noise, then I'll be brief, O happy dagger." She then says, "This is thy sheath. There rust and let me die." Let's watch this clip from the 92 play to wrap this bad boy up.
Yea, noise. Then I'll be brief. Oh, happy dagger. This is thy sheath. There rust and let me die.
This is the place, here, where the lamp doth burn.
And then after this, the watchmen enter the tomb to be followed by the friar, the prince, and 3 of the 4 parents. Only 3 of the 4 parents are still alive. We find out. So, now that we've carefully gone through and watched it performed by the 92 play through Juliet's death, and we've neutralized the zombie problem, let's see how the 96 movie does all of this, shall we? In our examination of the 96 movie, the last clip that we watched was way back when Romeo said, "Shall I believe that unsubstantial death is amorous, and keeps thee here in dark to be his paramour?" We still haven't seen the 96 Romeo drink the poison yet, but back at the word paramour is a good place to pick this study back up, because it is at that point in the 96 movie where things begin to happen in a unique way. We have seen from the 92 play, and we have read from the text, that the moment of Romeo drinking the poison and dying, and the moment of Juliet waking up, come tragically and woefully close to each other. In the 96 movie, these 2 events come so close to each other that they in fact overlap. So, we're going to watch this sequence, and we're going to focus meticulously on the order that they do things. But before we start, we need to make our 5th and final test of this matchup. And the test is this. We have seen how the 92 play has handled all of this, which was a very compelling and a very traditionally tragic handling. This test is going to be a test for the 96 movie about whether or not the 96 movie can match the 92 play in its tragedy, sadness, and woefulness. Woeful is the feeling we're looking for, and our verdict on this test, test number 5, will decide the champion of this tournament. The name of test number 5 will be More Woe. So that's the test. Let's begin our examination. We will start after Romeo has said the word paramour, which was part of test number 3, but remember, this movie excludes both parts of test number 4, which we already marked as a fail. So, during this first part, there's going to be no dialogue. It's just going to be Romeo putting a ring on Juliet's finger, but there will be some important details. This is what it looks like.
here while I set up my everlasting rest, and shake the yoke of inauspicious stars from this world-wearied flesh.
So already, before the end of Romeo's speech, we are given early details showing Juliet starting to wake up. It's very soft so that Romeo doesn't notice. Her fingers lightly twitching, etc. This by itself isn't a departure from the text. It's a matter of interpretation when Juliet can start twitching her fingers. Nothing is happening out of order yet, but it's about to be. Romeo will now continue with his speech, starting with "Eyes look your last," going through "engrossing death." Let's listen to that.
Eyes look your last. Arm take your last embrace. And lips. Oh, you the doors to breath. Seal with the righteous kiss. Dateless bargain to engrossing death.
So now Juliet is suddenly fully awake. She hasn't said anything yet, so we're still not technically out of order, but at this point Juliet will start to speak. And as she starts to speak, remember the three sources of woe. We'll take them one at a time. First, that she discovers her husband and the poison. This is shortened to just, "What's here? Poison." And this is what that sounds like. Let's listen.
Romeo. It's here. Poison.
So in this version, Romeo, instead of the friar, is the first person Juliet sees. She actually sees Romeo drink from the vial, and she quickly understands what's happening as she sees this. So her revelation is a little different, but all the tragic information is still there. That Romeo has poisoned himself, or in this case, that he is poisoning himself. What about the second disaster? The vain hope to find more poison and the line, "Drunk all and left no friendly drop to help me after," which is the very next line. Let's listen to this.
Drunk all and left no friendly drop to help me after.
Again, this is a little different. This time it's a little more panicky because she knows Romeo is in his death throes. So it's a different feeling, but it's still woeful. And as for the third moment of disaster, when she kisses him, let's watch this.
Now kiss thy lips. Haply some poison yet doth hang on them. So.
So she searches in vain for poison on his lips, which looks like normal, but then she very softly whispers, barely audibly, "Thy lips are warm," which is a little problematic in this circumstance because it's no big revelation that he's recently alive. He's clearly still alive and breathing in this moment. So that line doesn't quite carry the same weight that it traditionally does, and it's even a little puzzling that they include it. Now, keep in mind, at this point in the scene, we're still technically not out of order, because since Juliet has started speaking, Romeo still hasn't said anything. A lot has been skipped over, and traditionally, the different periods of consciousness of Romeo and Juliet don't overlap to the degree they do here, but since Romeo hasn't said anything again, no lines have been spoken out of order yet, until the next line, which is when Romeo finally dies. Let's watch that.
With a kiss. And died.
So Romeo's dying words remain the same in this version, the only difference being the kiss he's referring to is the kiss that Juliet gives him in search of poison instead of the kiss he gives her after the line, "Sealing with a righteous kiss a dateless bargain to engrossing death." And at this point now, we are officially out of order, which isn't a problem. It's just a copy and paste job, which is well within the guidelines. This moment of shared consciousness that they have together is the reason the presence of the friar needed to be removed, so that they could put Romeo dying after Juliet waking up, giving them this moment that they can spend together, just the two of them. So the removal of the friar is perfectly justified, in our opinion. And it's a bold twist. It works beautifully because Juliet is already supposed to kiss him, so Romeo is talking about a different kiss, but Juliet's kiss is still a kiss, so it works like a charm. So, the new order of things isn't a problem, at least not for textual reasons. It's always good to try new things with the text to create some new feelings. So, let's talk about those feelings. Does this, the final shared moment that Romeo and Juliet don't usually get, create more woe? That is our question. There is a case to be made that this moment is a bittersweet moment, emphasis on the sweet, and that the traditional order in which Juliet simply wakes up and finds Romeo already dead, which we saw from the 92, is an almost purely cold and bitter one, lacking any sweetness at all. In contrast, one may also be able to argue that this shared moment that they have together in the 96 is merciful to them because it affords them both, before their imminent demise, at least a sense of finality or catharsis or closure, despite fortune conspiring against them. sweetness, tenderness, mercy, closure. These all sound like positive things. The question is, do they mitigate or diminish the woe that we feel? If we wanted woe, then if they do that, then wouldn't that be a negative thing, making the 96 movie less tragic? We argue that they are positive things, but that they don't diminish the woe that we feel. They actually amplify it, making the 1996 movie not less tragic, but more tragic. Consider first the events as seen from the point of view of Juliet. She wakes up and she sees Romeo still alive. She experiences a brief moment of believing that her and the friar's intents were in fact not thwarted, causing her to experience feelings of joy and satisfaction and relief. And Claire Danes, the 96 Juliet, plays this perfectly by smiling. Those feelings, however, immediately collapse into enormous woe. The 92 Juliet, Megan Follows, wakes up and plays her part perfectly as well, for a Juliet that sees the friar first, not initially seeing Romeo on the ground. She plays it with apprehension, falling from a position of high joy and immense relief into terrible woe is a much steeper fall than from suspenseful apprehension into terrible woe. It's a lot steeper. Imagine this. Imagine if Romeo was in a hospital undergoing emergency surgery and Juliet was nervously waiting for an update in the waiting room. And the doctor comes out to deliver his report, and the doctor initially says, everything's going to be fine. But then 2 seconds later, the doctor says, never mind, we're actually going to lose him. That would be horribly and wildly woeful, almost impossible to emotionally process. But that's exactly what the 96 Juliet suffers. The false joy and the false relief, which is probably even worse, is what makes the 96 version the more horrible version. In fact, it's so horrible that it's now bordering on the deranged and sadistic. It might be too horrible. And if you believe the events from the vantage point of Juliet are bad, consider them now from the vantage point of Romeo. Romeo normally is supposed to die in ignorance. He has the cruel details as hints in front of him, but he's blind to them. The tragic irony that befalls him normally is reserved for only the audience and for Juliet to suffer. In the 96 movie, however, Romeo gets his fair share of it as well, meaning that no one is spared. And not only is he forced to suffer the same irony usually reserved for just the audience and for Juliet, not only that, but the 96 Romeo, for a brief moment, just for a brief moment, witnesses something that neither the 92 Romeo nor the 92 Juliet nor the 96 Juliet are forced to endure, which is he witnesses the impossible, that Juliet is alive again after certain death. He's witnessing a miracle of literally biblical proportions, but his fate is already sealed. As the whole cruel and tragic revelation falls upon him, There's nothing he can do about it, not even die in blissful ignorance. We are sorry, but that is too much. It's too much. It's too cruel. So I am ending this match by virtue of host stoppage. Ring the bell. Ring it. This match is over. It's over. The 1996 movie is now disqualified for reckless and irresponsible treatment of both Romeo and Juliet, but especially for Romeo. To allow this to go on any further would be immoral. Meaning, the 1992 Stratford play has won this match and is now the Romeo and Juliet Showdown champion. Congratulations to the 1992 Stratford Festival play. We wanted woeful, but that was too much by the 1996 movie. So we can now put the 1996 Baz Luhrmann movie as our number 2 overall on our top 10 list, and we can put the 1992 Stratford Festival play as the number 1, like so. Now, to briefly recap what we have seen from our 2 finalists. The 1996 movie is a refreshing spin on the tale, with hip music, a lot of personality and flair, full of fireworks and Ferris wheels and so forth, and there's something to be said for a nice Ferris wheel. More importantly, though, it does treat the text very respectfully, making only interesting, creative, and artistically justified amendments. It's very, very deserving of the title of first runner-up. However, the 1992 Stratford play deserves the title of champion. It isn't perfect. It didn't perform perfectly in this match, getting 2 strikes, nor did it perform perfectly in previous rounds. Most of its faults were simply due to some heavy abridgments in certain areas, which didn't always cater to our precise preferences. But it's still a nice hearty 2 hours and 40 minutes in length, so it still counts as a nice long version. The Stratford play won because, first of all, it did the bare minimum of avoiding any of the unforced errors committed by some of the other contestants, such as putting Romeo on an embarrassing motorcycle or putting Juliet on top of an inhumane torture apparatus. And by doing that, it was able to safely survive rounds 1, 2, 4, 5, and 6. Doing the bare minimum doesn't sound like high praise, but it deserves the title of champion for reasons beyond just that. The highlights that were demonstrated specifically regarding our examinations of Juliet, played by Megan Follows, in episode 2, which covered Act 1, Scene 3, and in episode 7, which covered Act 3, Scene 5, were very, very enjoyable. It's true they won today's match ultimately by host interference on self-inflicted injuries by the 96 movie, but the Stratford play was in the position it was in because of some very good and admirable work, as well as some very inspiring creativity. Just ask the 2009 Globe version. They found that out the hard way. By the way, we strongly endorse this version of the play for any and all educational or otherwise introductory presentation of the material. For young teenagers and people of a quote-unquote pretty age, let's say, we recommend it for everyone, but especially as an introduction to Shakespeare as a form of literature, which is meant to be performed on stage. So, with that, we conclude the Romeo and Juliet Showdown. Thanks for joining us. on the next season of the Shakespeare Showdown show. We will be shifting our attention from the town of Verona in northern Italy to the island of Sicily and the town of Messina. And there we will find the story of two couples. The first are madly in love with each other, and the second are also madly in love with each other, actually. Both couples are madly in love with each other. It will be the Much Ado About Nothing Showdown. Round 1. Next time on the Shakespeare Showdown show. Thanks for watching.